We all signed up for different reasons.
There was not a lot of opportunities for someone when they grew up around these parts. It was pretty much either join the military or go into the coal mines.
On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country.
The threat, when this whole thing started, was pretty centralized. Now the threat is to everyone on this planet's left and right.
It was chaos for a while, and everybody started getting in that deployment mindset and doing training that we'd never done before.
You sweat in training so you don't bleed in battle.
And to me, reality was the first dead body that I saw in Iraq was an American soldier on the side of the road.
America's combat mission in Afghanistan may be over. Our commitment to Afghanistan and its people endures.
When 9/11 happened, I was 15 and we're still over there.
I didn't go to war 5 times because I hated the enemy. I went to war 5 times because I loved everybody back here more than I hated the enemy.
On September 11, 2001, a new enemy arose. 4 cowardly attacks killed over 3,000 innocent civilians. With these assaults on America, the sleeping giant was once again awakened.
I was taking pilots to and from their planes, and all of a sudden the air raid sirens on the installation went off, and some voice come across the PA system that said, "All men man your battle stations."
We're all wondering what's going on here. You know, are they going to stop training? Are we going to head back to Fort Bragg, because we're Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You know, that's the tip of the spear right there. We parked the Humvee, and I found a guy that had a 4-inch black and white screen TV in the woods, and we sit and we watch the towers fall from that little baby TV screen.
I was actually in a morning class. I think it was a government, and we had gotten the news from another teacher that came in, and of course everyone was really affected by it. I was, really affected by it. Within a year, I got in contact with a Navy recruiter because at 17 you can enlist.
Everybody knows where they were at that time. I did 4 years active, 4 years at a reserve station in Delaware. I realized I could totally be called back.
I turned on the TV, and as soon as I turned it on, that's when the second plane hit the tower. And I'm pretty sure I was glued to the TV for the next 36 hours. Was it an accident? Nobody really knew. And then pieces started coming together. And then shortly thereafter, we were put on orders to go protect the armories and the key infrastructure around the state.
I knew right then that that was going to change every one of our lives, and it did.
After the 9/11 attacks, an angry America responded immediately with multiple forces armed to the teeth across Afghanistan and neighboring regions, bringing the fight to the enemy.
Whether we bring our enemies to justice or bring justice to our enemies, justice will be done.
9/11 happened. We didn't get, I didn't get to get back to my dormitory until I believe it was the morning of the 13th of September. I took a shower, shaved, changed unis, back to work 6-7 hours later. Chief stood in front of all of us and briefed us what was going on. Obviously, we were on FPCon Delta. He asked for 5 volunteers. I was young and naive, you're chief. Me and 9 asked you to do something. By God, everybody should jump and do it. So, being instinctively, I stood up and told him that I'd volunteered. And lo and behold, 3 or 4 other guys volunteered as well. He immediately proceeded and told us to go home, pack our basic training bags, because we were all young airmen, the big ruck, the big green that everybody still carries, and pack all of our contents, except civilian clothes, all of our military gear, and be back to the office by 1900 to meet with the chapel, the legal, the immunization clinic was coming to give us immunizations. We had been no notice tasked to, our orders stated variations were authorized, so, who knows how long we were going to be gone. And Our location was deemed classified, but it did say Southwest Asia. That's all it said, so that's all I knew up until I landed in the desert. We got on a C-130 in Doha, Qatar, and that was our last journey from Doha into what is now Jacobabad, Pakistan, which it's 120 miles south of the Afghanistanian border. The biggest shock was the heat. You know, we left London, it was like 62 degrees with 30% humidity. We landed in the desert, and General Tommy Franks walked up on the aircraft. Remember, there's only 6 of us. Walked on the aircraft and said, "Welcome to hell, gentlemen. I'll get off my damn plane." We get off that plane, it was like stepping in front of a hairdryer, and it never ended. But as the time progressed, our job went from base support, it went to, you know, providing ammo counts for the special forces coming in and out, you know, preparing combat lifesaver bags for the teams that are doing recon and search and rescue. And you know, we were basically the jack of all trades but the master of none. That's when I got my first taste of being a combat medic. And it's intense. And you know, you just lived it for 8 days shy of a year is how long I was in Pakistan. And we were leaving. We get on the aircraft, we're in full flak vest, full helmet, carrying the M4, you got your M9 on your hip, you got all your bags, it's miserable, it's hot. And then the loadmaster, who's a crusty old reservist, says, "Take your helmets off and put them under your feet." And you're thinking, why am I doing that? When you took off, you realized that, you heard tink, 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 and it wasn't sand, it was bullets, you were taking fire. We were the only 5 flights that I'm aware of, militarily, that we were the only 5 flights that left the AOR that day on the 1-year anniversary of 9/11.
The 9/11 attacks and other tensions in the Middle East created a large surge in patriotism. Alongside America's existing active duty service members, an influx of new recruits made our military stronger than ever and willing to answer the call to duty on any front.
Foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith.
That I will bear true faith.
And allegiance to the same.
And allegiance to the same.
As our forces continue to rout the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in every turn. In March 2003, U.S. forces began to also fight a familiar enemy in Saddam Hussein. Now the battle against terror was being fought on 2 fronts.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
March 2003, I knew it was a big thing. At the time, patriotism was at its highest, and I still wasn't really sure what I could do. And at Capitol High School at the time, I think it wasn't too long before that, there were other students that felt strongly against the Iraq War or U.S. presence or U.S. forces there. And as a kid, you don't really understand what all is going on. You're just kind of focused on school and classes and trying to graduate.
On Valentine's Day, 2003, is when they called us and said, "You're going." There were a lot of broken hearts that day. I remember the Master Sergeant I had at the time, Master Sergeant Doss, was calling people and calling families and trying to get a hold of soldiers, and he couldn't get a hold of everybody. And moms would answer the phone, and of course, how do you tell a mother of a 19-year-old, "Hey, we're gonna take your son for a year, maybe more, and he's going to war with us." We landed in Shannon, Ireland on the way over, and our colonel looked at us and said, "2 beers, have what you can, it might be your last one." When we landed at 5 o'clock in the morning, I had a C5 that had its rear end towards me and its engines were going full blast, and I was like, "Man, it's hot." And then the C5 took off, and I was like, "It's still really hot." I mean, it was no joke. We had landed in Kuwait, and it was 105 degrees at 5 o'clock in the morning. And a little bit of culture shock at first, coming from, central West Virginia, where at the time it was, 20 or 30 degrees in the daytime, to 105 degrees. And we ended up actually supporting Central Command for the entirety of our tour, doing engineer functions for the entire Kuwait AO. Now, there were times that we did get to go into Iraq, sparse at best, southern Iraq, pretty much from Nasiriyah over to Basra and south of there. People came home, there were divorces and new babies. You know, everybody was, I think, pretty satisfied with the deployment and the whole coming home process. It was long, it was tedious. And then coming again from 105-degree weather, when we landed back in Indianapolis, it was negative 12 degrees and there was 3.5 feet of snow on the ground. And nobody had any way to stay warm. So it was really, our first deployment was really a good trip.
They actually loaded pamphlets on the bellies of the B-52s that told the Iraqi population that we were coming, and they had 48 hours or however long the pamphlets said to get out before we invaded. And you know, they called our bluff. I guess they didn't see it, because when we hit boots on ground 6 days later, you know, 2 days after the initial invasion, after all the bombs settled, you know, they kicked in the doors of the palace and Baghdad International Airport. You know, you're clearing buildings and hearing breaching grenades, and it's intense. And you know, you just lived it for 8 days shy of a year is how long I was in Pakistan, and now I'm in another third world country doing the exact same thing again.
After less than a year of fighting the ruthless dictator, Saddam Hussein was taken prisoner by U.S. Army forces in December 2003.
I hear people cheering. We had just walked out of the chow hall that evening. Nobody really knew what was going on, and then some guy came running by, he was a civilian contractor, and said they got him, they got Saddam. And of course everybody cheered and clapped, and you know, being an E4 at the time, I really didn't think of the ramifications it would have, you know, catching a key figure like that. But looking back on it, I think for a while there, it solidified things for us.
Saddam Hussein was handed over to a UN tribunal and hung for war crimes December 30th, 2006. After decades, Hussein's reign of terror and oppression had come to an end.
He was a monster. You know, I'm a firm believer, you make your bed, you sleep in it. You know, you make adult decisions every day. From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. He chose to be a monster.
This marked a transition from fighting the Iraqi military to trying to bring peace to a civil war within Iraq.
And then when the insurgency started to kick up around 05, 06, that's when, you know, it kind of settles in you that, you know, what we did was good, but there's still a whole lot more to do. And as you can see now, it's still going on.
With coalition forces casualties mounting, General Petraeus and General McChrystal developed a new strategy of deploying overwhelming numbers against the enemy. This tactic became known as the Surge.
Tonight in Iraq, the armed forces of the United States are engaged in a struggle that will determine the direction of the global war on terror and our safety here at home. The new strategy I outlined tonight will change America's course in Iraq and help us succeed in the fight against terror.
We did our train up for about, I think it was about almost 2 months, and then we left Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, and headed to Kuwait. It was hot. Definitely hot, and spent about I think 2 weeks there, and then we headed north. We were heading to Tikrit in Iraq. I was in the maintenance section. We were there for almost a year.
When we first got there, I remember the first thing was when the plane door opens and you step off, and you're in Kuwait, and it was absolutely. I mean, you're talking about going from a moderate temperature to stepping out of an aircraft. I think we hit the ground probably around maybe 2 in the morning, and it was like 120 degrees. You know, I'd never experienced that type of heat in my life. We crossed over about midnight that night on the 4th of December and crossed over into Iraq, moving north, and our goal was to get to Baghdad. It was a firefight that kicked off. This was the first big, you know, situation with us. A big firefight kicked off right outside the gate, and I remember hearing all this. And then when the bullet stopped, they said, "You can go now." And it was a, you know, follow me, and then we headed out the gate. And I remember that's where I saw my first dead American, and that was what really, it still stays with me today. Because the thing was that, you know, when you go on a deployment like this, in your mind, because you are the American forces, and because especially, you know, you're an airborne force, you're a bunch of sappers together, you know, you have this vision in your mind of every time you come across the enemy, you're just going to smoke them, you know, and then reality will set in on you. We went out almost every day, and we would go on missions from Baghdad to Tikrit, Mosul, Al-Assad, and you know, every time you go outside that gate, you know there's a possibility you won't come back.
Our mission there was, in 2009 and 2010, it went more to like a humanitarian thing, as far as like supporting the locals and getting them what they needed, water, food, shoes, a lot of integrating ourselves into their society and letting them know that we're there to help them. But I did a lot of PSD, personal security detail, which was a group of guys from the 150th. I'm the only girl. A group of guys, they go out, and if somebody came in and they had to go from point A to point B, we would take them. Or if we had to go there and pick somebody up, then we would secure the package, the person or whoever the group of people are, and then we'd take them where they needed to go. So we're their security. Because of the culture over there, men patting down women would be frowned upon. So we were training the daughters of Iraq how to stand at a security checkpoint, how to conduct a pat down of somebody to make sure that they weren't either smuggling or have a bomb or a vest or something that they're not supposed to have. So that was very rewarding. Very nerve-wracking. Go into an area, secure the area, establish security from the rooftop down, and then patting in this long line of women from Iraq that don't speak English. That's another thing. There was an English barrier. So we had interpreters there, you call them Terps, and I don't know their language. So I'm having to come up with I'm teaching these women how to do this, how to conduct a pat down, and not being able to talk to them. So there's a lot of, you know, verbal and facial expressions, and trying to teach someone that there is a language barrier is another hurdle, but it was, again, a rewarding experience.
As the war on terror continued to carry on year after year, many U.S. service members saw multiple deployments. Unlike previous conflicts, most service members couldn't ever settle in back home. Our war-hardened veterans had to stay at a constant state of readiness because of a high possibility of redeployment.
Every time I went initially in 2003, I went back in 2005, and I went the last time in 2008. The mission in 2005 was the same as it was in 2003, except, you know, the military leadership had put more reins on us.
I enlisted with the intention that it would help me finish my college degree, but I ended up taking a different path, which led to multiple deployments. When I got on that deployment, they had me in the S2 because they were shorthanded, which is intel section, and I had to go to a few courses like in Fort Hood and Camp Wallace to get trained up on how to do intel, and then I helped out with that section until my maintenance section needed me to come back. About January, they shut down TQ and they handed it back over to Iraqis. So backing up a month or two beforehand, they told me that I was going to be a gunner, and on the 249, which is the SAW, it's a machine gun. And I didn't remember being qualified on the SAW, so I knew about, I think for about a week or two, I kept going to my supply sergeant, which is Sergeant Means, and I worked with him just to make sure that I knew what the hell I was doing, you know, with that weapon. And it was about January, we had the MRAPs, and We convoyed from TQ and we had to move to Ramadi, so it was about a 2.5 hour ride going around Lake Habbaniyah to get to Ramadi. And I didn't really feel comfortable because, you know, I kept thinking, like, what if I fuck up, or, you know, what if something happened? And I do know, like, hearing in on the radio, you know, if people were coming in, you know, they're not allowed to be in between our trucks, and someone telling me that there's someone coming up on my 6 o'clock, and I would, you know, move the turret to go look at it, go look at who's there. And I remember seeing a family of Iraqis in the car, and I'm watching them, you know, like through, you know, like with my weapon. And then I've never seen so many people hate me in my entire life. But I just felt that this was the task that I had to do and make sure that I do my job. Both deployments, well, in country, they were both to Iraq. They were 10 months in country, so for me it was a total of 20 months. I do recall as the deployment was ending on the first tour that I never wanted to ever go back there, and it was quite funny that I ended up going back.
The deployment to us kind of came as a surprise because we were still in reset. And I think there was a unit out of Louisiana that could not go. So the next unit in line was pretty much us, because we had just gotten back in 2004 and expected at least a 5-year break, and then they said, no, you're going again. So it came as a surprise. The unit wasn't staffed properly, so at the last minute they were getting volunteers and anyone and everyone that could come in. There was a big problem with IEDs. We worked on IED defeat teams, assured mobility, several things. Everything seemed to point at IEDs. And when we got in the country, we had pretty much from Baghdad north for engineer operations. There were around 700 or so attacks a month, IED-wise, that were being reported. And when we left around a year later, it was down to about 250 attacks a month. So again, I feel that, you know, the steps we took and the steps that our down trace units took, the steps that our division main took, to keep that assured mobility and keep troops moving and keep the country safe was, I think we played a very integral part in that. A little more stressful because on this time we were actually out.
From 2002, I was in Korea for a year. As soon as I come back from Korea, I went to Honduras. When I come back from Honduras, I went to Jordan. When I come back from Jordan, I think I had 3 months and I went to Iraq for a year. And as soon as I finished that command, I walked up the street and I deployed like 14 days later to Iraq again as the Chief of Operations in the 20th Airborne Engineers. And then the earthquake hit in Haiti and I was gone. When I come home from Haiti, guess what? Looked out, got a deployment to Afghanistan, and I was gone for 14 months. So to me, you know, I love the military. I seen the world, I got to do some great things. I got to serve with some of the greatest people on the planet. But my family had to come first, finally, because they never did before. And I hate to say that, but that's the truth. My job always was first. I have to put my family first.
In April 2010, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Abu Ayyub al-Mazri, was killed by coalition forces. After his death, the Iraq faction of Al-Qaeda was deemed incompetent by their leadership, forcing the group to splinter off into the infamous Islamic State, otherwise known as ISIS. In 2011, under the cover of darkness, the remaining coalition forces pulled out of Iraq.
After nearly 9 years, America's war in Iraq will be over.
This once again started a power vacuum in Iraq, despite many politicians claiming the Iraqi government could be self-sustaining.
I think pulling out of Iraq with the way we did it is probably why we're in the situation that we are in. I mean, you know, these people, we should have absolutely wiped them off the face of the earth. And I'm not saying wipe off, I'm talking about, you know, go after the enemy and absolutely crush him. And you know, I look at what happened. I mean, you know, we pull out of Iraq and it goes to hell fast.
You know, we were there to help these people. And a lot of them that you would meet, it seemed like they didn't want our help.
As ISIS defeated many Iraqi military units and captured much territory. In 2014, a U.S.-led coalition once again returned to fight in Iraq against Islamic extremists.
With the uprising of ISIS, the way I've felt about things is you can't really get rid of it until you step on it. And putting 50 or 60 troops here, a couple SEAL teams here, send a warplane to bomb them, that's really not going to solve the problem. You want them gone, you have to apply yourself and everything you have until it's gone.
You know, pulling our troops out of Iraq, it's kind of a dangerous situation. However, leaving them there is a dangerous situation too. The same needs to be said for Afghanistan or wherever else we go. You know, there's people in places now that who knows where they're at. You know, they're there. It's simple. The way I look at it is you have the power in numbers. You know, everybody's talking about ISIS this and ISIL that, or, you know, who's the next big terrorist, you know, team coming up. It's real simple. If they have 5,000 troops, we send 10,000. Power in numbers.
After a decade-long manhunt on May 2nd, 2011, the most hated man in America was found and killed by SEAL Team 6.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama Bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
Coalition forces everywhere celebrated Osama Bin Laden's death. His body was given a proper Muslim burial at sea.
It's kind of sobering that a death of somebody like that brings everybody together. It's, you know, it was more of a celebration than anything, and I would still celebrate it to this day.
It was a relief, but such a temporary relief that it's this, oh, yes, vengeance, but then there's still more to be done.
He was the mission, and regardless of what political aspirations either presidency had in it, one hunted him, one took him down, but neither one of them pulled the trigger.
I just got home. I was home I think 7 or 8 days. I was actually on R&R in the 2 weeks that the Air Force gives you for rest and relaxation. And I was at a retreat in Tucson, Arizona. And we had been sitting at a swim-up bar, drinking all day long. Somebody come into the pool and they said they got him.
As the war on terror continues on today, Islamic extremists continue to attack civilians in the Middle East, America, and Europe, including the horrific attack on Paris, in an effort to spread fear among innocent people.
In 2003, I had a good friend of mine who was an E5 at the time. You know, when you're an E4, you're pretty philosophical about things, I know, which is funny in its own right. But he talked to me, and we were sitting along a T-wall that night and smoking the best Cuban cigar you could find, and he said, "When do you think we'll leave Iraq?" I kind of thought about it for a minute, and I said, you know, in the 50s, we went to Korea, and we haven't left.
You're talking about people that they come from poverty that the American person has no concept of. When you grow up on a mud floor in pure poverty, everything you have is dirty. You're always hungry. Your marriage is dictated as to who you're going to marry, whether you like it or not. Life is not a good life over there.
I think it's kind of disheartening for families and soldiers as they've done their tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially if they've had fellow service members, brothers, sisters, family members that have passed. And it's disheartening to talk about what did it really mean? Because you would think that, okay, the objective was we got Saddam Hussein, we got Bin Laden, and we're still over there to help a country, to help these countries. And I don't think that it's fair for the American people to have to continue to ask questions as to what is the justifications to still go there.
The threat, you know, when this whole thing started, was pretty centralized. It was the location was easy to pinpoint in a broad span, but you had a general circle where you could draw around where the threat was. Now the threat is to everyone on this planet, left and right. You don't know how deep those roots are, and you don't know how intricate these, I'll call them the opposition, has integrated themselves into whatever that society or platform is that they're trying to infiltrate.
Over in Iraq, there's a bond that you build with your fellow soldier you go outside the wire with, that you can't even explain it in words, and I miss it.
You never know who you're going to meet. You never know how somebody's life's going to impact yours or affect your decisions that you make or anything. Well, you know, I had the honor and the privilege to meet a young man. I spent 16 minutes with him while he bled to death in my arms. There's nothing I could do. I tried to reach his femoral artery. It was rolled up. I couldn't get the forceps in to stop the bleeding. With that being said, you know, he knew he was going to pass. He knew he wasn't stupid. You know, but he was humble. He was calm and alert, just like we are now. You know, I pumped him full of as much pain medication as I could without killing him with that. However, I almost did. You know, I spent 16 minutes with this young man. He was 19 years old. I was 26. You know, and 16 minutes, this man changed my life forever. The last thing he said was, he didn't want people to forget why we were there and what we were doing. You know, we weren't there we were there to change the world one day at a time. We were there to make this place better for these people. You know, so the only thing that I could think of is me and my wife sat down and we agreed together that, you know, one way to honor this young man is to, if we ever had a child, a son, that we would carry that young man's name on in my family.
Anyone with a type A personality or anyone that wants to put themselves in a situation like that, like there's so many hundreds and thousands, if not millions, that volunteer, they want to think that there is no transition period. There is no adjustment phase. Suck it up and get over it. I struggled. I never thought that it would be a problem. But then I'm in a vehicle, catching myself, analyzing everything on the side of a road, but I'm not on an ISR anymore. I'm not on a road in Iraq. I'm in Charleston, West Virginia. No one is trying to get me. No one is going to drop something off of an overpass. And a dog on the side of the road is not a threat. It's a plane ride away from this lifestyle to back to what we had our normalcy. And I found myself getting very angry. There was no short fuse because there was no fuse.
The gripe that I have in reference to right now in terms of our military and our country is we have had thousands of soldiers that have been exposed to blasts. And they were done so before 2007, before anyone spoke about what TBI was. Nobody knew anything. If you didn't have shrapnel damage or you didn't have a bullet, as far as we were concerned, you were not injured. And to this day, you know, I've been diagnosed with Meniere's disease. I've got countless friends of mine that have found themselves in Humvees that were blown up, that didn't get any shrapnel damage or anything like that. And for the most part, they have been overlooked. But you know what? The sleep issues, the migraine headaches, I have balance issues. 22 veterans are committing suicide every day. And I'm going to tell you that there's a reason for it. And I think a lot of the reasons are the fact that many of them are not receiving the assistance that they desperately need. And it's to the point where they can't take it anymore.
Recently, in the last 3 days, we've had a retired guard lieutenant colonel, and current E5 commit suicide. The E5 had never deployed, and that's what's affecting the Guard more than anything is suicides. And I hate to see it. I've had 3 or 4 good friends of mine commit suicide in the Guard, and it's not that hard to pick up a phone and talk to somebody. I'm not going to think that you're a coward, and I'm not going to try to kick you out of the Guard because you're having family issues or alcohol abuse or drug abuse. Just talk to somebody.
I sit here now and I'm still adjusting every day. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do to acclimatize. You know, you can get used to the heat in like 6 or 7 days. You can get used to eating MREs in like 2 weeks. But man, going from a way of life to another way of life, and you know, if you don't adapt and you don't fit in, then you're outcast. And there's something wrong with that.
And I didn't really relate to my family and friends because it kind of seemed like friends back home in West Virginia were still doing the same thing. And it took me a while to get used to being a regular person, because I kind of felt that I had changed and they hadn't, and maybe roles were probably reversed. You're never the same person when you go over there. You're a changed person.
Although there is no end in sight for the fighting in the Middle East, the men and women of the U.S. military stand fast to face any threat on the horizon.